Paranormal King Radio Network, bringing you the best paranormal hosts and guests. Bringing you the best paranormal shows and features. Playing the top musical artists from around the world. Paranormal King Radio Network. With the best paranormal hosts and guests. The best in paranormal shows and features. Playing the best musical artists from around the world. Paranormal King Radio Network. The paranormal will never be the same.
Welcome to Millennium's Edge on Paranormal King Radio Network. Join Deborah Jane East and myself, Derek Tyler, on a journey along the cutting edge that you will never forget. Nobody pulls our strings, and nobody tells us what we are allowed to say or think. Millennium's Edge. There's a new sheriff in town.
And hello everyone, this is Deborah Jane East for Millennium's Edge Radio. This is our first show, and I'm not quite sure if everything is going like it's supposed to, but hopefully it will. And if not, we'll be able to get all the kinks out and everything. So I want to first of all introduce my guest host, and his name is Derek Tyler. How are you doing, Derek?
Doing very well, thank you. Nice to be here.
That's great, and we have an exciting show ahead for everyone. And he is a fascinating guest, and just one of many that we're going to be talking to in the future. And a lot of you probably have saw from the promo that we're going to be talking about a lot of different subjects: UFO contact, New World Order. Conspiracies, just a lot of different things, and we don't want to be able to have to stay stuck on one topic, but actually UFO contact and New World Order conspiracies are sort of related, aren't they, Derek?
Yes, it's all tied together, sure.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be a great show, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about our best-selling author, A.K. Kuykendal. All right, first of all, I've known him for a pretty good while, and I'll have to say that he is probably one of the best writers that I have encountered. And I'm going to read his bio here, and then we'll get right down to our interview. A.K. Kuykendal uses truth to write fiction through his Conspirators Odyssey series. He was born in Albany, Georgia, but grew up as a military brat on a Marine Corps base in Hawaii, and later at the Camp Lejeune Marine Corps Base in Jacksonville, North Carolina, which, you know, of course, is my hometown. He's married to Magdiel Kuykendal and is the proud father of 3 sons, Felix, Kel-El, and Jor-El. And please forgive me if I massacred those pronunciations, but he is the author of the novels The Possession, The Evolution of the Patron Saint, and Origins. Readers are welcome to contact him at the following email address, and that's info@thewritersofbooks.com. So, how are you doing this evening, AK?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on your premiere show. I'm honored.
Well, you are a fascinating guest, and you have been writing for quite some time, and what I found most enlightening was that you actually have what I consider a different kind of genre for writing. You write using truth as fiction. Whatever inspired you to do that? Because I've never heard of a lot of authors doing that.
Well, what inspired me to do that is people like Orson Welles and the shows like The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits, presenting plausible narratives through a premise that is wholly or can be considered wholly factual. Because in any great writing or any writing that actually led to films, major motion pictures, and television series, there always has a layer of truth to it. Although the percentage either way we can never tell, but I've always can be able to read between the lines to see what is truth versus what is fiction, where most people are just entertained.
Well, and I find that very true myself, because how many times have we saw a movie or read a book to find out later that there were a lot of things in that movie that turned out to be truth. And one of them that I will mention, because it's just at the top of my head, is Close Encounters. And that, of course, was a movie by Steven Spielberg, and it turns out that he did a lot of research and hired people to get into the nitty-gritty details, and what he accomplished was a incredible movie. So I really take my hat off to you, Mr. Kuykendal, because I think it's a wonderful idea.
That's something that I've fallen in love with. It gives me a chance to explore many different factions. By writing truth through fiction, I'm not only talking to those the people among us that are entertainment bound, the ones that don't read between the lines, that don't look underneath the rock or look behind themselves when they're walking at night. I'm not only looking to entertain, but I'm also looking to disseminate certain truths to we true truth seekers out there. So pretty much my work is like the best of both worlds. It's both entertaining and both revelation.
Well, and I think that's what makes your formula, if you want to call it, work, is because you do put quite a bit of time in research. Would you tell us maybe a rough idea of how much research you'll put into a book before you even start writing it?
Oh, actually, the research I put at least 6 to 7 years of research into a book before I write it. Into the concept of the Conspirator's Odyssey concept, I've already put in the legwork of the series to be able to get notes that pretty much can go on forever. And that's why I've created the series. It couldn't be completely flushed out without losing people in the first book entitled The Evolution of the Patron Saint. And I wanted to have a soft approach to individuals without scaring them to death before I move on with my next title, which is Origins, and then the subsequent titles that will come after that. I had to first walk them into the premise, which always started with the it started with the John F. Kennedy assassination, because in the situation of the John F. Kennedy assassination, everyone for 50 plus years have always talked about the who, what, when, where, and how of his assassination, and they've ignored the concept of why. It is the why behind his assassination that my theory or my hypotheses comes into play. And I believe that the whole of humanity should hear about this, because it has connections that are bigger than just the assassination or his death alone. And it has connections it has otherworldly connections, believe it or not.
Well, and I've discussed this with you before, but I will have to agree with you and say that a lot of people have no idea just how much JFK was tied in to UFOs. But before we get into that, I'd just like to touch base a little bit with you about what do you feel about UFOs, and have you had any kind of experience? And you don't have to elaborate, but what got you really interested in tying in this connection with UFOs and with the president?
Well, this is the first time, maybe I get an exclusive here, but it's the first time I've even mentioned this on the air. Only in a recent article I posted on my blog, on my website's blog, about my abduction encounter. I am an abductee. I don't use that to market. I don't use that. I don't even hardly talk about that. It's like it's more tongue in cheek when I mention this, but this is the first time I'm actually discussing it outright. It was at a time when I was younger. I was abducted. I didn't understand what it was at first. The only thing I know is I saw a craft that was hovering over around the trailer park I lived in North Carolina at the time. I won't tell the date and I won't tell the time or my age. But at that time, I saw a craft that was huge, that was over a dike, that was with trees that were over the dike and the trees. And it was because when you lived in a trailer park and in the southern area that I was in North Carolina, I noticed this huge thing hovering in the air. It's like a huge shadow, because at that time it was not that much light pollution in the area, and so therefore it gave me a beautiful view of the stars. That's one thing I liked about living out there, because it gave you a beautiful view of the stars without the light pollution. You know how that goes.
Oh yes, beautiful.
But when I looked in the sky over the dike as I was walking toward my home, leaving my mother's boyfriend's house at the time, I saw this huge shadow that was hovering above it, silently hovering above the trees and above the dike. And I was eating a bologna sandwich at that time. I remember I was eating a bologna sandwich, and this pale light came on off to the side that indicated that it was some kind of circular craft of some sort. A pale light came on, and it started moving my way. Now, I'm not stupid. I took off like a bat out of hell. I was gone. I ran to my mother's boyfriend's house as fast as I possibly could. That's the only thing I remember, is that light flickering on. And as I was running as fast as I could, I was looking over my shoulder the whole time. And as I was looking over my shoulder, the light phased out very slowly. The whatever it was, it rose at least a couple of inches more in the sky. It inverted, and it went down behind the dike and down the thickness of the trees and disappeared over the cornfields. It disappeared before I got to my mother's boyfriend's house, because I banged on the door. My mother was on a business trip at that time, and I banged on the door because he was watching me, but I was right next door to him. But banged on the door, and just to let him see this thing so I don't feel like I'm crazy. And when he came to the door, he looked at it. He looked out there. He didn't see anything, but he told me, if you feel so passionate about it, you should write it down so you'll never forget this experience, whatever you think you saw. I did that, and I never divulged this until recently in an article. But the funny thing about it is that as I started researching about, astronomy, I started researching about the craft, about aliens and UFOs, I realized that night I actually lost at least 2 to 3 hours of time. The bologna sandwich was, had bugs all over it. When I went back to the street to look at it, when I left my mother's boyfriend's house to go to my home, everything in the house was totally different. It was much calmer, but it had cigarettes that he hadn't smoked at that time. With the ashtray that was empty, it was completely filled, and beer on the table. A lot of little stuff was going on in the house that wasn't there, and I just left no more than I knew of was minutes ago. And in a nutshell, basically, I had an experience that I later come to realize that it was an abduction. And after that, I've experienced a lot of things that I don't know if I've been taken again, but I have experienced a lot of things that gives me telltale signs that I have been taken on numerous occasions. But again, I never really talk about incidents like that, and I don't know if it's affected my writing or not. I just know I've been fascinated in it ever since. And even though I was scared to death running from it, even at that same night, I was so intrigued, but I was scared too. I took my bicycle that night and stupidly went around in the dark, because there was not that much light pollution, in the dark by the cornfields, looking for anything that was in the sky. And ever since, I've been looking up.
Well, I'll have to say this. When you said that, that you didn't forget about it, I know how that is, because when you see something of that scope and of that immenseness and so totally different from anything that you've ever experienced before, it's like it's imprinted in your mind, and whatever you're doing,
you can never go back to the way it was.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Derek. You can never go back to the way that you were, because this basically has changed your life forever.
I mean, I've tried to ignore it all my life. I've literally tried to ignore it all my life. But I've been fascinated by photographs of gray aliens that I've seen, like in communion and things like that. Fascinated in the readings and the research. I don't know what it is. I kept contributing it to me being a military brat and seeing certain things that I shouldn't have seen during my time on military bases. But I don't know. I just know the experience I had, and after the research, I realized that missing time was part of abductions. And I put 2 and 2 together, and it came to believe and understand that I was taken that night. I didn't just see a light. I might have just been dropped back off because it left quickly and time did pass. So between that running that I was doing. I
Right.
don't know. Right. I think I wasn't running at all. I think I was already taken, but I didn't know that.
What color would you say that the UFO was?
It was nothing but a complete shadow to me. I didn't see no colors. I didn't see nothing. The only thing I saw was that pale, whitish light come on off to the right of the craft, and it started rotating around, and that's how I knew it was kind of circular, because it rotated from the right side, and it was coming around very slowly, getting ready to point at me, and I took off like a bat out of hell. I was gone. You couldn't stop me.
Have you ever noticed that when you approach streetlights, they burn out?
No, I've never. No, I have noticed that at one home I lived in. It was one of the largest trailer parks in North Carolina that I lived in at one time. And every time I would walk to a light and I would tap it, it would go off. But anybody else would tap the light, it never went off. And we just thought that was like a cool thing, that you could tap a light and it can go off when you wanted to. But it never happened to anybody else. I know that my computers sometimes go off on their own, or have to be rebooted or have to be updated. I'm talking about at schedules that are completely off the schedule that it's supposed to be. But sometimes they would just shut off. Even programs on television would shut off on me. We're watching Netflix, it'd just die. And I don't know why.
Wow.
It seems that they affect our bodily aura somehow when they take us.
Or it's the implant.
Possibly it extends outward farther than it used to or something, but many people, including myself, have had the effect of, when we approach streetlights, very often they'll just die. I've killed 3 streetlights in a single block before just by walking underneath of them.
I'm thinking that it might has something to do with implants. It might be that they might be affecting electrical currents around you. But also, I don't know about implants. I only researched this stuff after that experience, and I've been attracted to this stuff ever since. I've looked in the sky. I can discern between what might be something weird versus what might be just a regular aerial craft, a human craft. Because you keep looking at this blinking light on the craft, and if you don't see that blinking light, I think it's something else. You know what I mean? But then if you look at it long enough, 9 times out of 10, you'll see that usual blinking light that gives you a telltale sign that it's a human craft.
Well,
it's hard to tell these days because, of course, we have disc-shaped crafts ourselves, and we have a large triangular craft called the TR-3B, which has been sighted many times in many places, and they make it in a variety of different sizes. It's often mistaken for an alien spacecraft, but it's actually an above top secret American craft which utilizes alien technology in its design. It has an alien technology-inspired propulsion system and cloaking device and other features, which basically gives it the same performance characteristics as an alien craft would have in the atmosphere. The propulsion system basically is a gravity-canceling system which makes the effective mass of the craft 89% less than it normally would be. Makes it able to go very fast and very high.
So I bet you never even realized that from this sighting that your world would become so involved in the future with what happened to you.
I would never have thought it. I didn't, I talked a lot, extremely a lot, to the point where my mother at one time told me that I should be a writer, because at one time I fired so many questions at her at one time, and I was in a car with her, and she said, I think you need to be a writer. You talk she said, quote unquote, you talk too damn much.
Mamas will tell you the truth.
Exactly. Maybe that's what triggered it. But either way, I've been a creative at heart. I was at one time I tried my hand at fashion modeling. I tried my hand at acting. I was a thespian for a certain amount of years. I've done stage play, off-Broadway stage productions, lead characters in certain stage productions, and wanted to be on television, be in the movies. But I decided against that. Then I tried my hand at screenwriting. And then I decided against that. And basically, I've been a creative. I've been a storyteller all my life. I just didn't know it. And I just pretty much realized that some years ago, and just took off in it. But I wasn't going to write a story that wasn't going to be as effective and as appealing as Orson Welles, and the way he affected you with the iconic War of the Worlds, the way he affected the community and the world. I love that kind of concept. I want people to think when they read my words. I want to plant a seed in your head to get you to research for self-awareness, and not just take it for entertainment value, because it's more than that.
Well, you certainly picked some relevant topics to discuss, because this is Well, basically, it's the biggest story in the history of the world, and it's being completely ignored by the mainstream media. And people need to be aware of all the different aspects of their lives which are directly tied into this, whether they realize it or not, and how many things that we've been told are the truth that are actually not the truth at all, because it affects each of us every day, whether we realize it or not. And I think it's a shame that it's covered up so much that people are intimidated and discouraged from even discussing it.
And, I just realized something. All three of us, myself, Derek, and you, Mr. Kuykendal, all of us are sort of where we are at today because we had an involvement in UFOs, because a lot of you know that Derek Tyler is writing his first book, and you have written books based on research that you've done about UFOs. You've woven that into your stories and everything, and I got into being a radio show host. I mean, I'm an author. I don't write UFO books, but I started going towards a radio show because I'm so fascinated. So it's amazing how people's lives are changed just from even experience something like this.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Well, tell me about your first book that you wrote, and how you developed the story for that, and the reaction to it after you got it published.
The the reaction to it was kind of slow because, according to my biography, the way I broke into literature, because of course I don't self-publish anything. I just don't believe in it in some way. What it seems like between what Mr. Derek has gone through and I'm currently experiencing, something might force me to go at my own. But I'm gonna hold on to my guns for the time being until I get a finite understanding of what actually took place with the contracts that we're not really going to discuss tonight, because of the heavy amount of marketing that's been behind my work so far. But at the cover of my book, Conspirator's Odyssey, the first book was known as The Evolution of the Patron Saint, and if you can see on the front cover, it has a flame that's through it, but it has the seal of the President of the United States. But in that seal, you have the calling of the missing in action emblem.
Yes.
If y'all notice that, with the flame through it, then you got the President of the United States. Most people don't, for some reason, haven't asked me about that emblem on that cover. But my project had to do with John F. Kennedy. And why he was assassinated. Most people think it was because of all this stuff, Bay of Pigs, the Chinese-Russian involvement, the UFO ET disclosure information, all that other kind of hoopla. But I tell you from my research, John F. Kennedy and the book talks about John F. Kennedy's assassination, but he was assassinated primarily because of what I exposed in my work about the Super Soldier program. It was called, I call it the Animan Project. But if you can look through history, 9 times out of 10, you'll come up with that same concept known as Animan. They'll call it Animan or Animan, but it's known as the Animan Project. And he was killed primarily because he was going to pull out the 1,200 peacekeeping troops that were in Vietnam just on an advisory mission. He was going to pull out the troops. But the military science divisions could not allow that to happen because they had an ongoing agenda. With any weapon that's devised by our military or the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower spoke to in '61, with any weapon, it has to be tested. And the only way the military-industrial complex can test a weapon is in real time, and that's meaning you need to bang the drums of war in order to get that war going. With the drums of war being pounded away like crazy, the only war that was in front of them was the Vietnam War. And you can tell that that's true because pre and post John F. Kennedy's assassination, the drums of war were beating to go to war with Vietnam, and it tells you something about that, some relevance to my hypotheses, primarily because it was a small boat in the ocean that fired on a large vessel of ours, and that's what was supposed to have triggered the Vietnam War.
False flag attack.
Exactly. That makes no sense. They just wanted an excuse to go in there because they needed to test a weapon. Kennedy was going to pull them out of the war and wasn't going to green light that war. Lyndon Baines Johnson was given, which I talk about in Conspirators Odyssey, The Evolution of Patron Saint, Book 1, was given information about this new weapon that was this new weapon and this new serum that needed to be tested in war in Vietnam. Kennedy was only killed because he was in the way of them testing this new serum on the men that were in our armed forces at that time. And that's where you heard about men going crazy and one of our soldiers going crazy in Vietnam. You hear about rapes and killings. They were going insane because of this drug, this new serum. But the caveat is that the serum was created post the 1947 Roswell UFO crash incident, where they did recover alien technology and extraterrestrial bodies.
Wow.
They also recovered human bodies from that debris. Did you know that?
They recovered who?
They recovered human body parts in vats.
Oh, that were
inside the crashed disc at Roswell.
Exactly. These are the reasons why they put so much of a onus on keeping everything secret, because they know that certain beings, certain otherworldly beings, we are their primary food source.
We are indeed, and Kennedy made several other mistakes too. You probably already know this. One thing he did was he signed an executive order which would dismantle the Federal Reserve Bank, and he announced at a meeting of the National Security Council that he planned to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces so it couldn't put itself back together, and to go public about UFOs.
Yeah,
combine all those things with the Vietnam War, and he was dead a short time later.
That would be a deal breaker, I'm sure.
But you can see how put the pieces of the puzzle together, and it lends heavy credence to my hypotheses that it was all that other stuff that everybody has been talking about for 50 plus years. It had everything to do with the Vietnam War. It was the Vietnam War and his reluctance for war in Vietnam that actually led to his demise. It wasn't all that other stuff. It was the Vietnam War. And most people, but the why, again, people for 50 plus years have been focused on the who, what, when, where, and how. But I've always focused on the why behind his assassination. Forget all that other stuff. Why did he get assassinated? But when you go into the why behind it, it opens up so many other doors that would just blow your mind. And Conspirators Odyssey, The Evolution of the Patron Saint, Book 1 in the Conspirators Odyssey series, explores the why behind that assassination, and how Lyndon Baines Johnson truly hated Kennedy. Hated Kennedy.
He did.
Just thought he just thought he was a young Oval Office gigolo and someone. But basically, these powers that be in the military-industrial complex was just manipulating Lyndon Baines Johnson in order to get to test their weapon that they wanted to test anyway. Lyndon Baines Johnson was just there to clean up the mess after the fact, because the experiment failed miserably.
It did. And I'll never forget seeing Johnson taking the oath for office, and Kennedy's wife was standing there, and she had the dress on that she wore in the car when he got shot that still had blood on it, and she had a look of shock on her face. And what I have read is that Johnson wanted her to be there because he knew that people would accept it more if he had Mrs. Kennedy there with him. So I think you're exactly right about him not liking Kennedy at all.
But whoever ordered that assassination sure had a lot of juice, because they got the cops and the Secret Service involved in it too. So that's a lot of juice.
It's very powerful individuals that were behind this. Because remember, Eisenhower, again, we talked about this off the air. You, Derek, and Deborah, we talked about this off the air about how, I'm so sorry, slip of the tongue. Shoot, what about the train of thought?
Eisenhower warned us against the military-industrial establishment.
Yes.
Very serious statement that he made, and it's largely been overlooked, I think.
Yes, and how Eisenhower really did hate the whole process. He hated politics altogether. You wonder how he became the president of the United States, which I talk about in Origins. But he really hated the process of politics. He hated it all. but he talked against the military-industrial complex because of his hatred for what was going on, the experiments that were done in secret on the American populace, actually human beings in general. He knew about the 1917 incident where Waitsrick, which was known as the Red Baron, shot a UFO out of the sky in 1917. He was also part of those experiments. Basically, he talked in 1961 against the military-industrial complex, but his speech in 1961, his farewell address to the nation, was actually a coded message, which I kind of decipher in my in book 2 of the series entitled Origins. I give it my best shot at deciphering what he was saying and how he was putting it to the American people, which was pretty heavy at that time. And it
was all true, and it all still continues, just as he said it would.
Exactly.
Yes. And you are exactly right. Kennedy labored over a lot of his decisions, even, when his brother and his father, tried to push him sometimes to make decisions, he would still hold off until he had weighed in all the different factions.
Yes. The connections are like a puzzle, a massive puzzle. Most people don't realize that it is the why behind everything that people are not contemplating. Everything is about the who, what, when, and where, and how. No one's even thinking about the why. And the why, and behind the why, you have more stories than you can shake a stick at. And if you,
they don't want you to think about it.
Exactly.
Nothing is what it seems to be when you look at it closely. Everything is different than we believe it to be.
You're right, because right on my website, I put right before a synopsis on www.thewriterofbooks.com on my synopsis for the second book in the Conspiracy series entitled Origins. I open it up, the synopsis, with something that's totally separate from the synopsis. I focus on the why. I say why. I say this one word question is one many of us first learn and continue to use throughout our lives. I say, why did our government cover up the fact that the German fighter pilot notoriously known as the Red Baron shot a UFO out of the sky over Western France in 1917? I said, why has our government kept the truths concerning the 1947 Roswell UFO crash incident under lock and key? I said, why has our government put such enormous effort behind whitewashing details in the John F. Kennedy assassination? Why haven't we heard any official details from our government on the imminent alien invasions of 1942 and 1952? Why, in a synopsis, people don't usually ask why of the readers of these certain prevalent events that have happened in our United States or in the world. I always say that we want to know the why of it. I say only once we know why should we then turn to other questions of who, what, when, where, and how. And that's where alternative history comes in at, because I think alternative history has found a place in literature as we all seek to learn the why behind what happens in our world. For many times we are not satisfied with the answers to questions that are spoon-fed through us through the media.
Well, people have become complacent, and they go about their lives, and they worry about what TV series is on and about different things. But, when it concerns things like this that have blatant information that, if you can research and find it on the internet, then anybody can find it. Anybody can find it, but a lot of people are afraid to talk about it, and I think that is the issue. People don't
That's
come out
the issue. People should ask also about the government's lack of disclosure on UFOs. It's not, as some people seem to think, especially the people that seem to run these disclosure advocacy groups, it's not a black and white decision, should we or shouldn't we, that the president can make. He can't make that decision. He doesn't have all the information himself. And any president that tried to go public about that, he wouldn't live to make the speech. Because the why there is too terrifying for the public to ever be told. They'll hold off on that as long as they possibly can.
Most people don't realize that in every Conspirator's Odyssey story, I always start with a note to the reader. It's an author's note. And most people don't start off a novel that's supposed to be, people that start off a novel that's really literally fiction, they don't start off with an author's note because they're not really trying to talk to you. They're trying to entertain you. So they'll blast off into a great story that starts in the dead of night, and she brushed my hair back, blah, blah, blah. I start with an author's note for a reason, because in every book, no matter how fantastical it might sound, I'm actually talking directly to you and about prevalent circumstances in our United States as well as around the world and our globally issues that happen around the world. And so I bring it home before I even start the story that might seem to some fantastical and to others dead true.
Well, that's,
as I've said before, they don't kill anybody to keep secret the news about friendly aliens coming here to assist us, but they're killing people over this.
I know, and it's a shame because so many people spend years of their life, trying to get information and researching, like you have, Derek, and you, AK, and you spend so much time in research and blood, sweat, and tears, actually, and to get it out there to the masses so that people can see it. But yet, a lot of times, you come up with roadblocks, like you have just recently experienced, AK, and also Derek has experienced. So, I mean, the message is that they don't want you to talk about it ever.
They've spent untold billions of dollars to keep that information from us, and they will continue to do so. They'll use any methods and any techniques at their power, at their disposal, to keep that story down.
But you are absolutely right, Derek, because you have but there's a weapon that has been turned on we the people in the United States as well as around the world. It's a weapon known as PSYOP. It's the same weapon that Eisenhower in 1961 Farewell Address to the Nation spoke of we the people becoming captives of a scientific technological elite.
This is the longest, most expensive, most sustained PSYOP in the history of the world, and it's going to continue for the foreseeable future. It shows no sign of even ratcheting down, nor will it.
It won't ration it down. There's agenda. There are agendas that are going on behind us. Most don't understand that these agendas. They deal with genetics. They deal with cloning. They deal with like the super soldier agenda. Even to the point where when I talk about not only the connection between the UFO extraterrestrials as well as the super soldier agenda, what we're trying to do while we're creating super soldiers that their minds can't be read by these extraterrestrial factions. They're trying to create a perfect human being to the point of forcing human evolution, but they're doing this while they're playing politics with these otherworldly beings, thinking that they're smarter than the average person. When some of these beings, what I consider the gray alien species, they created us. They created us before they planted us on Mars first, before they had to eviscerate Mars because the war between them and another extraterrestrial faction got too heated, too bad, to the point where they had to get rid of us on Mars and just completely eviscerate the planet and seed us, like the whole concept of Noah's Ark, seed us on this new blue planet known as Earth.
And anybody just tuning into this broadcast, they're going to be blown away by even hearing the last 2 minutes of our conversation, because it's not in the mainstream media. And unless we get out there and do things like you're doing, AK, and like Derek, writing books, then nobody's going to know about what's going on, and that's exactly what they want.
Well, I can tell you a couple of things about Mars that came from very high reaches of the United States Air Force. One is that the Mars Pathfinder mission, which supposedly showed a 360-degree panoramic view of the Martian surface, if you take a close look at that, you'll see that it really is not a 360-degree view at all. It's a 270-degree view. They cut off the area behind the Pathfinder probe because there was a boulder that they estimate to weigh about 4 tons, which had been moved recently. They don't know who moved it or why, but there was no way to show that without making it obvious that the boulder had been moved. And I was told that there was never going to be another publicly known manned mission to either the moon or to Mars during our lifetime, because they're both owned basically by the alien Greys. And in addition to that, in the Cydonia region of Mars, there lies the remains of an ancient city of native Martian design and construction, which was destroyed in a war millions of years ago.
Wow. Well, that's certainly something that, the world does not know about in general, because you don't see that out there in the headlines.
That's why this space, is it SpaceX or space? Is it SpaceX the one that's a civilian?
Yes, SpaceX.
Project? That's never going to make it into orbit. Mark my words, they'll never allow that ship to get into orbit, because if it did, the first thing that would happen is it would be tracked by alien spacecraft and would report it back to the public, and the game would be up. They'll never allow it into orbit.
Wow. So you can see here, AK, how you have sort of got into a can of worms with your research because people don't know about this. They don't know about it. And there are people in the chat room right now are saying, I can't wait to read his book. I can't wait to read it. People want to know. Have you found enthusiasm? Have you received letters or anything, or people come up and told you that they're fascinated by your topic and the way that you put your information in your books?
I get constant banter back and forth over social media, and I'm all over the place. You see AK Kuykendal everywhere, concepts. I give snippets of my stories here and there, and I get rolling conversations on them constantly between my blog, website, and other social media platforms. Yes, I do. I get a lot of conversation. I love having these conversations. Sometimes I can't even keep up with them. It's just so plentiful. But I like talking about my concepts, but most people will try to flush out so much they don't need to read the book. But it's hard for me to divulge every detail in the book in a basic conversation over social media. But yes, people are clinging to the concept, but they're clinging to what I'm divulging in the concept. I'm not breaking any barriers or anything. At least I don't think so. Or maybe I'm just my own worst enemy. But I am giving things that make people think really outside the box. I damn near forced them to think outside the box because I believe that's what we need to think outside the box. Because basically I'm trying to get them to break away from this very powerful weapon known as PSYOP, because they are controlled with PSYOP. How do you think that we're getting we're so okay with scientists experimenting on human beings? Why do you think we're okay with that? Because of all these superheroes. You got Superman, you got Captain America, you got all these superheroes out there. So everybody, with the Captain America concept, for example, everybody is going to be okay because it's been covertly seeded in your mind through the weapon of PSYOP that when the time comes for our nation and the world to experience the superhuman soldier, we'll be okay with it. But no one ever thinks about how in the hell did the super soldier be developed. You had to have a starter point, you had to have a testing phase, and then you get to your super soldier. So imagine what happened before the super soldier came about. And now the U.S. Army is starting to slowly disseminate information about what they're doing and what the advancements that they've made through DARPA and whatnot. They're talking about soldiers being able to go for days without food or sleep, and for food they can live off their fat stores. Soldiers that can lose a limb through an explosion in battle and regrow that limb within days. Come on now. How did they get this far in their scientific development? It was a process. It had to have a starting point.
Definitely.
And that's what I divulge in my work. It's a starting point to this. And one of the biggest starting points was in 1917 on when the Red Baron shot a UFO out of the sky. And most people say, how is that possible for an archaic weapon known as guns on a aircraft of that era through the Red Baron to shoot it down? Basically, it was a surprise attack. The Red Baron and his second in command, Peter Waitsrick, were just doing a morning patrol. So in the morning, the sun is even brighter when it's coming up. And he had the sun on his back. And if anybody knows aviation, you cannot see a plane coming at you with the sun on your back. And basically, he just fired as many rounds as he possibly can. And for some reason, it caught this craft off that was just sitting over there over Western France. It's caught it off guard. And it fell out of the sky, which was reported like a rock. And then the German ground forces, collected what was there. But there were two beings that the Red Baron looked down and saw two of the craft's occupants scurry and disappear through the woods. So out of all the bodies that they recovered in 1917, two did escape. Do we know what happened to those two? No, but I do give it a chance. I do divulge on what I believe happened to those two beings and what they had in their possession that they could not let any human being get their hands on.
Well, it all speaks to me about control. The government or the forces to be, whoever it is that controls all of this stuff, they want to take away our choices and decide for themselves for their own reasons about what knowledge that we get. And it all boils down to money. Wouldn't you agree, Derek?
I would say money and power.
Money and power.
They've been making. Well, if you notice a few years back when they announced that they'd cloned Dolly the sheep, I think it was, and then suddenly you never heard another word about cloning since then on the mainstream media. And the reason is because the next step is obviously going to be human cloning, and they're not ready for the public to be involved with that, basically because the military is already cloning humans and has been for several decades.
Agreed.
Have you ever watched or listened to James Casbolt?
Oh, he's one of the super soldiers, isn't he?
Yeah. I was just wondering if you ever happened to catch any of the interviews with James Casbolt, also known as Michael Prince.
I think I saw one with him, but I'm not wholly familiar.
He's a very interesting guy. And I tend to believe what he says. He's one of the super soldiers. I think he said he's a third generation clone.
Oh gosh.
And he's got some very interesting things to say.
I bet you if you tested his, this is just my theory, my hypothesis based on my research and what I talk about in Origins. I told you and Deborah off the air about Eisenhower, which I discuss in my new project, and I bet you if you can get a blood sample from anybody that claims to be a super soldier, I bet you'll find remnants of Eisenhower.
Really?
I think they've cloned the Eisenhower base. I told you that Eisenhower was a successful candidate in the super soldier program ever since he was in his mother's womb. Remember Operation Seed Stock that I spoke of?
Yeah.
Eisenhower was a successful candidate at Operation Seed Stock. I discussed that in my book as well. And Operation Seed Stock meant to experiment with the brain of infants still in the wombs of their mothers.
Wow, very interesting stuff.
I talk about this because he was carefully groomed throughout his career in the military. See, at one time in the military, this is where you'll know that my hypothesis has legs based on what happened to him when he went into the military. See, the military goes by a certain code of conduct. You can't lie, cheat, or steal, blah, blah, blah. He was a semi-pro baseball player before he went into the military. But he went into the military, they didn't allow him to play they didn't allow him to play baseball in the military because if you go into any college, he went to West Point. If you go into any college, you can't play an organized sports or a regulated sport if you've played semi-pro anything on the outside of college. Mm-hmm. But they ignored the fact that he played semi-pro baseball at one time during his youth before he entered to West Point. But they didn't allow him to play baseball, which he wanted to do. They wanted him to play football. But they were basically testing his strategy, and he was very good at strategizing a way for his team to win and whatnot. And they were testing that out on him too. And it's much more sinister than that. He also was during his time as the military, he got 200 and some odd dollars in a housing allowance, but he had already received a check for his housing allowance. This gentleman actually stole the money. He didn't report that he got a second check. That is grounds for expulsion, especially brought down from a rank of being any kind of officer. But he was actually protected by a general in the army because the general wanted him to work with that general, and that he just got a slap on the wrist after he stole that money. I studied in my book as well.
Very interesting.
Well, you have certainly done your homework, that's for sure.
Yeah, it adds credence to my theory because he was protected his whole time in the military. You ever notice that Eisenhower, for as great as he was, the commander of the Allied forces, I'm talking about, he ain't never picked up a weapon, he ain't never shot anyone, he ain't never did anything. He was the quintessential strategist. But but the crazy thing about it is, in 1939, he was brought to the White House in a clandestine meeting with Roosevelt and then Secretary of State Cordell Hull, and that's when he was introduced to or he saw 4 alien beings in 4 glass tubes of formaldehyde, and that's when he was given a mission to be the spokesman for the human race. He was the spokesman that worked the treaties with the extraterrestrial species. He was also the spokesman that when that threat was made to Roosevelt, prior to the the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, the Battle of Los Angeles. Yes, he was on multiple command appointments in World War II, but he was called directly by Roosevelt, and he was sent out to make amends or to see what was going on and why the alien species, the great alien species, made an overt threat to destroy an American city.
And they also hovered a fleet of UFOs over the White House.
But that was in 1952.
Right.
Prior to that was the Battle of Los Angeles. Eisenhower, I kid you not, Eisenhower was the one that made sure that the alien factions did not fire back at the barrage over 1,500 pounds of anti-aircraft artillery that was fired at the craft, the destroyer that was hovering above Los Angeles, California. Why didn't they fire back? Because our artillery couldn't harm them. You notice that nothing fell out of the sky.
Right.
But abruptly, the firing stopped, and the craft just moved away eastward and disappeared. What was all that about? Eisenhower was the one that put a stop to that because he negotiated the first treaty amongst them in 1939. They believed that Roosevelt's administration violated the treaty, and then they were going to come and they were going to destroy Los Angeles, California, just as a message to them. Eisenhower was sent back and sent to talk to them. He talked them down, but the details that I talk about behind that story, there's a story behind the story behind the story. I detail that in my book, but yes, it was Eisenhower. His hands were all over. His hands were over everything. You see, they couldn't read the mind of Eisenhower, and that's why he was charged with this mission of being a spokesman for the human race. And it was agreed to by all the civilized nations for America to lead that campaign. But what I talk about, which might sound fantastical, is that ever since 1917, there was something very important that the Americans got their hands on within their craft, or something on their craft, or sovereign, or the king and queen of their race. Americans got their hands on something of great importance to this alien faction, to the great alien species, and that's why the great alien species were willing to do a deal with them. But the Enigmanoids, which was the reptilians, they've been at war with the Greys for an era, ever since Mars. And they got their hands on one of the gray alien species weapons, one of the massive weapons in the universe, and they only had partial of this weapon, and they seeded this information through one of their minions, an enigmanoid or a reptilian known as Albert Einstein, who sent a letter in 1939 to Roosevelt prior to him greenlighting the Manhattan Project.
Yes, everybody, you heard him say Albert Einstein. Just in case you were thinking you might have heard things wrong. That in itself is going to take a lot of people by surprise.
Yes, he was an enigmanoid. He was a reptilian species. It was known as he was known as an enigmanoid. He was a reptilian. He was a minion. He was a minion of the reptilians, but he was a reptilian. He was the one that sent that letter in 1939 to Roosevelt, that clandestine letter, and he talked about fusion energy, talked about nuclear energy, and that's where Roosevelt greenlighted the Manhattan Project. And no matter what, the Manhattan Project was going to bear the fruit of those powerful weapons. And you ever notice that? You do know that the United States is the only one to have ever dropped a nuclear weapon on any nation. It was the United States. But how did that come about? I have research, and I have information that leads me to believe that, and hear me clearly, it was Roosevelt. It was Roosevelt that allowed the Empire of Japan to attack Pearl Harbor.
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. He wanted an excuse to launch us into World War II.
He needed an excuse to get into World War II. But mainly, it's two tiers to his mission. It was meant to get us into war with get us into the World War II. But he's needed to eventually drop the nuclear bomb on the Empire of Japan, not just because he wanted to send a message to Japan about don't mess with America. It was actually to send a message to our otherworldly species, aka the Greys.
Well, I don't think anybody's ever brought that up before, so that is very intriguing.
Basically, he said basically with dropping those bombs, having an excuse to drop those bombs, sent a message to the gray alien species that say that we are technologically at one with you in a sense. You cannot overtly just destroy us, or we will let loose our nuclear arsenal. But
there was actually another race of aliens which offered us a treaty deal before we took the one with the Greys, and they were a peaceful race. They offered to help us, but they would not give us military technology, and the condition of their assistance was that before they would help us, we had to dismantle all of our nuclear weapons. And it was a
that hasn't happened.
Breaker. Of course, that was a deal breaker, and so we signed up with basically the wrong side.
What we signed up with, we did our just based on my research. I'm not saying anybody's wrong or lying or your research is faulty or whatnot, and I'm not in a debate with anyone. I'm just giving you based on my research. The two alien species that we need to be wary of is the gray alien species, which not only created the Enigmanoids, the reptilians. The gray alien species are scientists. That's all they are, scientists. But they have power. If you go against them, they do have powerful means of destroying planets. But the gray alien species created countless species in the universe. But just like I believe they created us as well. The Enigmanoids turned on them. You know the amygdala. You've heard of the amygdala. We are part of we have the reptilian gene in our bodies, human bodies, because we are part of the experiments from the gray alien species, which also created the reptilians. The reptilians are a violent race. And with the reptilians, we are their primary food source. But the main thing you need to understand is that amygdala, the reptilians, are the amygdala on its own. It's just an evolved form of our simplistic amygdala, and that right there is our violent gene. The amygdala is at the base of our neck, on the left base of our neck. That's our amygdala. You got to realize, you got to put two and two together when people start talking about these things. And we do have violent tendencies, and that's what. But the reptilians are pure violence. That's what they are, and they turned their backs on their creators. Even since before our seeding on Mars. But not to go into details about that. Let's just say the only two radiant species that we need to be wary of is the Greys and the reptilians. The reptilians need to warm our planet. That's why they seeded the information that they stole from the Greys to us in order for us, so we can have we can develop these weapons on their behalf, so they can warm our planet. Nuclear weapons wholeheartedly warm our planet, because that's why they live in subterranean environments, because they need it hot, moist, humid. They need that type of environment. But above, it's not like that.
Well, they must be happy because with global warming, that's happening.
But that's because of them.
Right.
It's because of them. They started the starting of the global warming trends took a drastic change after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After the dropping of the nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it took a violent change ever since then.
And they're also adjusting the chemistry of our atmosphere is being changed through chemtrails. I mean, there's no other conclusion except that chemtrails, they're so widespread and they've been going on now for about 20 years that they are basically altering the composition of our atmosphere.
It's called terraforming. That's exactly what they're doing. It's terraforming. And you ever heard of Arnold Granger? The one that the airplane pilot that saw all those planes that came in, those spacecraft, he reportedly saw those spacecraft.
Yes.
That was the reptilians coming back to Earth after their I'm getting a slip of tongue. The reptilians, I'm so sorry, but the reptilians were drove away from this planet. They've been on this planet since the dawn of mankind, since the dinosaurs were here. They've been on this planet. That's why certain tribes and certain peoples around the world, they were worshiping, and they have figurines and statuettes of worshiping reptiles. They were here way before mankind even evolved. They were here. What was it? An asteroid hit our planet some billions of years ago. But we were already seated on the planet. But the Greys seated us here after Mars and allowed us to evolve naturally. But prior to that, you had this massive asteroid hit the planet, that wasn't an asteroid. That was a reptilian craft of some sort that landed here. And ever since then, they've been here. But they've been trying to get to us, the human beings. They've been trying to get to the point where they are right now. It's hard to put into words what I'm trying to flush out here, but you have to read between the lines of what I'm saying, because I would end up getting tongue-tied trying to explain what it is.
I'm getting the bigger picture here that you're trying to explain, and it actually doesn't look all that pleasant, but it's a reality. They say truth is stranger than fiction. It most certainly is. But I will have to say that you have brought up questions that I've never heard anybody ask. For instance, you were talking about the battle at Los Angeles. I never heard anybody say why they thought that they didn't fire back at us, because they certainly could have taken us all out, but it was like they were just looking down and saying, oh, there's some little ants down there, look at them, aren't they cute?
Part of it was a demonstration that we couldn't touch them if we wanted to.
Yeah.
I do have another hypothesis that goes against goes away from my ploy. You notice that now and before, there's a lot of rash of UFO sightings, obvious UFO sightings in the broad daylight and whatnot over the city of Los Angeles. You ever notice that, right?
Well, they are the top. The California is in the top 10 states in the nation for UFO sightings. They are the number one top sighting place.
California is like an island of some sort, right?
Yes.
There are subterranean enigmanoids underneath the city. Massive base of enigmanoids underneath the city of Los Angeles. That's a hypothesis that I'm researching now.
Someone discovered the tunnels down there before.
That's another angle as well. But you are right.
Yeah, someone's discovered the tunnels when they were working on the LA sewer system, I think, and they extend for miles and miles and miles, but when someone went down there to check on it, they'd all been sealed off.
Yes, trust me, when I say it's massive, it's massive. Remember, the enigmanoids can shapeshift. They are powerful at shapeshifting. The gray alien species cannot shapeshift, but the enigmanoids can shift.
And they're also highly intelligent. They have IQs of 200 and above. Is that correct, Derek?
Yes, that's what I was told. That the reptilians have an average IQ of 200.
Now think about this.
The most intelligent race known to our military.
Hence my theory or my hypothesis about Albert Einstein.
Wow. Oh my gosh. The more you talk about this stuff and you think about it, the more it just falls into place. And I've never heard anybody say that before, but it certainly does sound like that could very well be the case because, of course, Einstein was extremely intelligent and smart. But for the listeners who are not really aware of what a reptilian is, or you call it how do you pronounce that word?
Enigmanoid.
Enigmanoid.
It's a reptilian species.
Right.
Enigmanoid.
And they're not
very
familiar.
Dangerous, very deadly, very dangerous, very deadly. But they are part of us, and that's why they shapeshift into look like any one of us because we are part of them. We have the amygdala. The amygdala is them. They are fully formed. They are a fully formed version of the amygdala that we harbor at the base of our skull. But that deals with anger. It deals with frustration. It deals with evil, the tendencies that we have. The human being has. But let's just look at enigmanoid. It is a fully formed version of our simplistic amygdala.
And it does seem that these enigmanoids and the reptilian race seem to be dominating a lot of stuff that's going on into the world. So it's very interesting.
Notice how not to cut you off, but you notice how this whole executive, the three branches of government, how they're fighting amongst each other, Republicans, Democrats, and all that other kind of hoopla.
Yes.
When someone says something about global warming, no matter if it makes sense or not, people just ignore it. Certain people, certain politicians ignore it.
Oh yes, they do.
You gotta think twice about who they are. If they're ignoring common sense, ask yourself, who are they? Or if there might be an enigmanoid, or if they're working on behalf of this species.
That could be a
Well, and
possibility.
they're allowing and financing chemtrails, and that's an act of war, no matter how you look at it, because they're denying that they exist, and it's well known that those are directly harmful to people. And I've seen chemtrails myself dozens of times over the town I grew up in. There's no question that they're here and that they're being done, and it's an act of war against the American people, and Congress is aware of it, and they're funding it. Yes. And I dare say there's no senior American military officer who would ever agree to order something like that or sit still for it unless he was compromised.
My research leads me to believe Harry S. Truman is the one who flagshipped the concept of the military-industrial complex and fortified his efforts tenfold while he was in office. The chemtrails, this is just a hypothesis. The chemtrails came along because initially out of a need to try to save us. Harry S. Truman believed that he was doing the world a favor based on what he knew of the alien agenda, based on what he got from his former president, former boss, because he was the fourth. In Roosevelt's tenure, he was the fourth vice president and the final vice president before Roosevelt suddenly died, which I also talk about in my recent novel Origins, that he did not die of natural causes. He was assassinated by the Eniguanoids, but that's neither here nor there. We don't need to discuss it right now. But Harry S. Truman, based on what he found out from Roosevelt in his tenure, is the reason why he set in motion the military-industrial complex, and they developed science programs that were supposed to be set out to save the human race. The chemtrails, based on my research and a hypothesis I formulated based on that research, is the chemtrails were distributed massively amongst the American people in order to protect us from the Eniguanoids, to make us, let's say, unedible or undesired by the reptilians.
Well, they're actually much more sinister than that. They in addition to doing these other things that you were speaking of, they're also directly spreading diseases among the American people. When they analyze the residue from chemtrails, they find nanobots, they find nanoviruses, man-made viruses, which glow on the tip like they have a light-emitting diode. They're responsible for Morgellons syndrome, and they're basically an act of war every time that they spray those on us. Mm-hmm. They're attacking us directly. They're assaulting our cities with chemtrails.
There's so much under the surface that we don't even realize.
They've been doing that for countless generations. They've been doing this for a long time. We don't know whether we're coming or we're going. That's why people fight like hell.
If we find out, they'll kill us before we can tell anybody.
Exactly, but there's more secret and clandestine things that are going on in our America as well as the world that we would pretty much die in place once we find out. But these things, only a person at the top of the executive chain, which is the presidency, could divulge this stuff if they wanted to, but they're under a heavy threat, as all presidents are.
And the president doesn't even
have no power
anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Presidents don't have any power.
Presidents will come and go. The most he can be here is 8 years, and then he'll never give another order to anyone. But the military will still be here, and the aliens will still be here, and so will our projects. And we can't risk some do-gooder coming in here for 4 years and dismantling our projects. So we'll do what we have to. Exactly. As I said before, you don't give any group of people $10 trillion to build the world's greatest military war machine and then expect that they're going to do what you tell them. You'll do what they tell you to do.
Yeah, and AK, you're exactly right. That's what happened to Kennedy, because he was going against the grain. He was actually a rogue because he wasn't conforming, and that's what happened to him. So it's very sad. I have a question from someone in the chat room, and I want to say thank you guys for all showing up for our first show. Author James Welsh is in there, and we have Matt Freeman. And he said he is wondering what you remember from the abduction, specifically the description of the interior of the ship, and if you remember any communication that occurred, and if there were any messages that you received.
And do you happen to know your blood type?
No, I don't know my blood type. I can find out, but I don't know my blood type. I don't know anything that happened. Only thing I know is what I told you. I knew that I saw that whatever that shadow was that was blocking out the massive array of beautiful stars that were in the sky over that dike of tree, that dike and those trees that were extended from the dike. And when that pale light came on and started moving my way, I dropped my bologna sandwich and I took off like a bat out of hell. That's all I know. And then when I got to my mother's boyfriend's house, I knew that after, yelling and frantically banging on the door to try to get him to come out because I didn't want to seem like I was crazy. The thing had already disappeared behind the trees, over the dike, and out into the cornfield. I never saw it again. And but I knew that in looking inside the home of my mother's boyfriend's home, things were completely changed, and I only left there no more than a couple of minutes ago. So I knew that time had passed, but I have no recollection of what happened to me. I only knew that time
It's interesting that you'd mentioned missing time because one of my associates, my former associates, was the guy who wrote the book called Missing Time, Bud Hopkins. And he studied abductions in great depth. He unfortunately had a blind spot that kept him from really understanding all he could have. But he's I believe, the first one who pinpointed the missing time phenomenon.
Yes, I mean, I didn't know anything about missing time. I didn't know anything. But in looking back, based on my new information that I got about abductions and understanding of abductions, I realized that, yes, I was missing at least 2 to 3 hours. And because I wrote it down, but I didn't know I was missing any hours. I just wrote about my experience. Like my mother's boyfriend, George, told me, just write it down so, you'll know you had this experience. Write it down. I didn't think he believed me. He was a little bit tipsy at that time, and he just told me to write it down because I was banging on his door rather crazily. I was banging on his door so much, I dented his screen door. That's how hard I was banging on the door. And basically, he knew there was something wrong with me because that's what I just told him. Did you see it? Because it had just disappeared. Once he opened the door, it just disappeared from the house. That's all I know. But I don't know, with knowing that about missing time after the fact. At that time, as a child, I knew nothing about no missing time. I knew nothing about UFOs. I knew nothing about all that craziness. But as I grew and I started to understand more and more about UFOs and the abduction scenario, I realized that I was missing time in looking back on it. And I don't know anything about if I was taken. I don't know what I was taken. Only thing I know, I was missing time. I don't know where I was. I don't know if
you're missing time, you were taken.
Exactly. That's how I know. I infer that I was taken because I was missing that time.
I've interviewed over 2,500 abductees, and I'm kind of a wizard on that subject. If you're missing time, you were taken. I promise you.
Exactly. So, but I don't know if I was. Exactly. I had to have been abducted based on what I know now, but I don't know anything about that time. I have no clue.
It makes it difficult for anyone to come along later and tell you that UFOs don't exist and they can't get here from there, doesn't it?
Exactly, but I know that Deborah, you posted something about 72 experiences,
and you had a lot of them, didn't you?
Actually, I had all 72 except for the pregnancy one. I've never been pregnant.
Now that would be a miracle, wouldn't it?
But the majority of them apply to this very day, which makes me believe that I might be continually being taken.
Do you have any nasal problems?
I have a lot of nasal problems. I have ear problems. I have nasal problems. I have, I wake up with, your genitalia hurt, like the scrotum area hurting, for no reason. It's weird. It's weird. I even talked to my wife about it this evening, and I don't really like talking about that because I wake up with constant dreams about, violent dreams that she keeps telling me she's waking me up from, and I don't really recall it. But I do know that let's just say that I think if I've been abducted at that time, and in knowing what I know now, I might still be being abducted. Maybe I'm important in some way, but I don't.
They also perform astral abductions. Did you know that?
No, I don't know.
They can abduct your astral body, and I'm not talking about just the aliens. The military does this as well. The military is responsible for well over half of the abductions right now. They have technology which can make them appear to be gray aliens. They use alien tech, and they have different purposes for abducting people. One of them is, after you've been abducted by aliens, you have amplified psychic abilities for 3 to 4 hours after they return you home for some reason. And the military knows that, and they'll come and take you a second time, and they'll use you to remote view for them involuntarily until those effects start to wear off, then they'll bring you back. Okay,
I have one last question here, and it's interesting. It says, so I was wondering if the extinction of the dinosaurs has anything to do with the reptilians or greys. What do you guys think?
I would say no. It may be creatures that they brought with them. I don't know.
They claim it does. The reptilians themselves claim that they're descended from the dinosaurs. I don't believe it.
I don't believe it at all.
I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I think that humans, if you really look at the tenets of Darwinian evolution, the evolution of man can't work according to Darwinian evolution. It's impossible. You don't take a group of black folks that come out of Australia 60,000 years ago and by now have Swedes and Chinese and Eskimos and Polynesians. Evolution doesn't work that way. That's just not, I mean, evolution occurs, but the evolution of humanity, as we're taught in school, is a lie. We're a created species. We're a genetically engineered species.
We are genetically engineered species. I believe that our creators are the great alien species, but they just planted us here on this blue planet after Mars, after they eviscerated Mars, and just let us grow, girls grow naturally. But their mortal enemies are the ones that turned against their creators, which was the great aliens, which was the Iniquinoids, and they've wanted us for some reason. I think it's because they can shape-shift into us because of our amygdala or some other sinister reason.
They eat our flesh, and they get quite a big kick apparently out of human flesh, which is infused with large amounts of adrenaline. In order to make that happen, they terrorize people first, and they won't eat anything which is already dead. Then they terrorize people, sometimes by chopping off their hands, and then once that adrenaline starts pumping in through their system, then they'll kill them and start eating them while they're still alive. That's True. One reason that the government is never going to disclose anything voluntarily, because if they told you that, boy, you think you don't get along with the neighbors down in Alabama and Mississippi. Wait till you hear about how they get along with giant reptilian baby-eating space invaders.
Oh gosh, that's just too nasty to even think about.
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
but this is all hitting on very, very strong points. Very strong.
Well, I know this. If we wanted to give our listeners something to chew on with this show, I think we've given them quite a big bite of stuff to digest. AK, I want to thank you for being my guest. I tell you,
thank you very much, AK. Pleasure talking to you.
Yes, you're so fascinating. Will you tell everybody how they can find your books, and if you want to go over their names again, that would be great.
You can find all my books my site www.thewriterofbooks.com. It is the site I call my site the site where truth reads through fiction. But the percentage either way of fact or fiction, you'll never know because I will never tell. But you can visit me at www.thewriterofbooks.com. The three titles that I have so far out on the market is The Possession and The Evolution of the Patron Saint. I got a new publisher that I'm in the process of negotiating with The Possession to bring it right back out to print because something happened with my publisher recently. And Origins is not quite out yet, unfortunately, but after I get some, I'll give you an update once I get some information on what exactly is going on with that project, because it was supposed to have been out in late 2014 or early 2015, and apparently it's not out yet, even though the project's been done for over a year. But I can't really divulge or talk about what's going on with the project. Basically, you'll know when I know, ladies and gentlemen. But www.thewriterofbooks.com, you can find out everything you need to know about my projects, what I write about. And if you want to talk to me, just write me at info@thewriterofbooks.com. That's info@thewriterofbooks.com. And I'll talk to you about any and everything that you need to talk to me about.
And how do you pronounce your last name? Because I think I might have been mispronouncing it.
It's pronounced Kuykendal. It's Kuykendall. It's Dutch. It's Dutch German, and the R, the Kuy, the Y is pronounced R. It's Kuykendal.
Kuykendal. Yes, I thought I was looking at your name, and I thought I didn't see an R in there. But Kuykendal. Well, I tell you what. I certainly myself cannot wait to read your books. I've read one of them and I thought it was extremely well written, and they're not going to find a dull moment in it anywhere. But it certainly seems like you have experienced a lot and you've put a lot of effort and research into getting the right information. So I hope all our listeners out there will check out your books, and if they'll go to Millennium's Edge on Facebook, I will post all your links and your biography and everything. And within a short amount of time after this live broadcast, this will be on podcast, and we'll be sharing it around. And if anybody wants a copy, they can just send me an email, Deborah Jane East, and I'll be sure that you get a copy of the podcast. But thank you so much for being my guest. Keep us informed what's going on, and I hope you have a great evening.
I hope you have a great evening too. Thank you for having me on the premiere show. It was an honor for me.
You take care. All right.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, are you still there, my co-host, Derek? Okay, well, I just want to thank everybody for being there for this first live broadcast of Millennium's Edge. We hope that we will have lots of listeners tune in, and if you have questions or guest suggestions, I want you to feel free to let me know, because we want to try to get people that are pertinent to what you're interested in. And I just want to thank Paranormal King Network for having this on our show and for making us part of such a great family. Ross, you're wonderful. I appreciate it, and I hope that everybody will tune in next week. Our guest is going to be Wayne Miller. He is one of the most incredible UFO photographers that I have ever encountered, and his photographs of what he has taken is surely going to make you sit and think. So I hope that everybody will tune in.
Show indeed.
Yes. Well, thank you, Derek Tyler, for hosting with me.
My pleasure. Thank you, Deborah.
And we will see everybody next week. Have a good evening.